All right, so before we begin this, I need everyone to have an open mind, okay? You have to think of yourselves right now like the pilgrims coming across to find a new land. You don't know what you're going to find. Things are going to be very unrecognizable to you because our brains are very pattern recognition. We have a sense of the way we think the world works. But underneath, if something is incongruent with that, we tend to have these defense mechanisms, all right? So the analogy I want to give to start is this is like the Matrix, all right? You have a choice right here, right now, of taking the orange pill or taking the blue pill. If you take the blue pill when you leave here, you go back to your life, your normal life, you're gonna keep doing the things you're doing. But once you take this orange pill, it's a one-way door, all right? It's kind of like when you learned that Santa Claus wasn't real. Like, you can't unlearn that, all right? This is the same principle. So before I start, I just want everyone to understand that your open mind is the most important part of this, all right? So about 3 years ago, I wanted to lose weight. So I just started walking every day. But my brain can't just walk and not think. So I just started listening to audiobooks and podcasts, and it was becoming like this 3-hour thing every day. And then before you know it, I go down this rabbit hole and kind of self-educated myself. So this presentation is based off about 6 or 7 books, mainly The Price of Tomorrow, How Deflation is the Key to an Abundant Future by a man named Jeb Booth. He inspired me so much that I had to get him on the phone for 2 hours. And his mind blew me away. So I just want you guys to understand that we're going to talk a little bit about what is money and how it works, because nobody teaches us any of this stuff. So we pass this. We can pass this. So we're going to go through this in a couple of different topics, like what is money, the history of money, understanding debt and inflation, and then topic 4 will be the calculated and inevitable solution, which I will talk about organically without the slides. So why did we create money as a civilization, all right? So before money, we all know we had a barter system. Like, I made shoes, you make cloth, but money essentially at its value is a medium of exchange, all right? It's something that that you can give to someone else, that you could, how could you actually quantify that 6 pairs of shoes are worth 1 cloth? How does that quantifying work? What if it takes more work to make the 6 pairs of shoes than it does to make the 1 cloth, all right? So we created money as this medium of exchange, right? So in ancient Rome, they used the denarius or the drachma, all right, which was essentially made of silver, all right? And if I ask anybody in this room what caused the fall of Rome, people don't know. Who defeated Rome? All we know is that barbarians were at the gate. How could this small band of barbarians defeat the biggest empire ever? So Rome's collapse came when it discovered a cheat code in their currency. Because silver is hard to mine, they decided, well, we could mine copper and then dilute it into the silver, therefore making more currency. So when you make more currency, the currency is chasing less and less goods, all right? So you're essentially inflating your currency, which eventually leads to hyperinflation. So it came to a point where everyone's like, well, in Rome, nobody's going to take this currency anymore, all right? Because it starts losing its value. And as you lose your economic value as a power, now the barbarians are at the gate. And this has happened over and over and over again in history, all right? So what constitutes good money, all right? Money has to be divisible by 1. It has to be divided into smaller units of value, all right? It has to be acceptable, accepted by every transaction, kind of like the US dollar is accepted all over the world, all right? There needs to be a limited supply, and this is a key one, a limited supply. We can't mess around with the supply of money. If you mess around with the supply of money, as we talked about here with Rome, and we're going to talk about with future civilizations, this has always been an issue, all right? So it has to be uniform. All versions of the same denomination must have the same purchasing power. See, purchasing power is what matters. It's not money itself. It's what money buys you, all right? If you had $2 million and a loaf of bread was $1.5 million, would you really care if you had $2 million? All right? So this is a concept we need to understand. It needs to be portable, all right? Means you have to be able to carry it with you, transfer it everywhere, all right? This is why we use coins, because they can fit in people's pockets. So all of these things, money is this invention that we made and is an abstract concept. It really has no value but the value we give it, all right? So it also needs to be durable. So like one of the reasons we chose gold and silver is because it's extremely hard to mess with them. You know, like we don't use seashells as money because seashells can crumble, you know, like they're useless in that sense. But gold is durable and it's really hard to mine, which is why gold will always have its value. So it's really important to understand that scarcity is what matters most. Like, I want to focus a lot on scarcity because we do not live in a scarce money world today, and this is going to cause massive issues over the next 10 years, all right? So we lived under a gold standard where money was backed by gold for a very long time, all right? Now, we manipulate money. Governments manipulate money, banks manipulate money, all right? And how this has affected things. This photo right here is a photo of Weimar, Germany, all right? This is a German woman after World War I throwing Weimar into a fireplace just to simply get warm. That's how useless money can become. This gentleman here is using it as wallpaper because the money is useless. It's abstract once it becomes hyperinflated. Now, if you were to ask, people what caused World War II, a lot of people are going to say a lot of different things, but essentially what caused it is after World War I, we asked Germany, specifically France and England, said, you have to pay your debts back to society. You guys lost, you have to pay your debts back. They could not pay their debts back. So what did they do? They printed their Weimar, all right? So here is an interesting chart of how quick hyperinflation, Weimar hyperinflation can happen, all right? So you see January 1919, all right? That's how many German marks you needed to buy 1 ounce of gold, 170, all right? As you can see, this goes down 4 years. This is not a long period of time. This is eventually how many German marks you needed. All right, so you see how quick this hyperinflation happens because they have to keep printing and printing and printing to service the debt. Now the problem is when you keep printing, everybody else suffers the most, all right? Especially the people at the bottom of the pyramid, all right? So this is what led to the rise of Hitler, all right? He ran twice before and lost, but it wasn't until humans got desperate when they started thinking to themselves, all right, we got to listen to this guy, he's the only guy that can help us. And obviously they were wrong. But as you can see, this is how bad it gets. 4 years. I mean, 4 years. So your money is going through this cycle right now. And this is a harsh reality that we all need to understand, all right? So after World War I, the world lost 20 million people, all right? And they called it the Great War simply because it was the first time we were using mechanized weapons, all right? Every war before that, subsequently, was probably like a gentleman's game. Hey, you lose 10,000 people with muskets and swords, but 20 million people died because we advanced technology to use mechanized weapons. So we go into World War II, and now we've lost 40 million people. So now we've had 60 million people dead after 2 world wars. The world comes together and says, we cannot do this again. This is a zero-sum game. Everybody loses, all right? So what they decided to do was they decided to globalize the world, all right? Which essentially leads us into the world that we live in today, all right? So they all got together in Bretton Woods, Maine, and they created the Bretton Woods monetary system, all right? Which is the system that we live in. So they decided that since the United States was the least affected by World War II, mainly because of geography. You know, Europe is very condensed, so Europe kind of got destroyed during World War II. You know, the United States is on the Western Hemisphere, it's a completely different ballgame. And their economy was booming, that the world agreed that they are going to back all their currencies behind the US dollar, all right? So if their currencies fail, the US dollar is the global reserve currency, all right? We back everything, right? And what we've done is we've kind of incentivized everyone to stay relatively peaceful, all right, by doing this, all right? Because we're all tied together globally, all right? So, and then the US dollar at this time was backed by gold, and we were gonna hold everyone's gold, all right? Now here's where it gets tricky. In the late 60s, early 70s, we started spending more than we had in gold. Now, we were the ones holding everyone's gold, so you know nobody can audit us, all right? So it started becoming visually obvious to other countries that our spending habits were becoming a little too reckless. Specifically with Vietnam and a bunch of things, but this was an inevitability anyway. So France decides to send warships for their gold in the early 70s, and we had to give it back to them. So around this time, Richard Nixon, you can find clips on YouTube, says we're temporarily suspending the conversion of gold, and we're going off the gold standard. The one thing about the federal government is when they say temporary, it means permanent, right? That was 1971, it's 2023, and nothing has changed, all right? We have nothing backing our money for 50 years, all right? So as you can see, this chart here is a consumer price index. It's kind of a basket of goods of what you pay. So like they measure it based off like, you know, bread and meat and things. So as you can see, the inflation chart pretty much stays relatively the same until 1971 when we go off the gold standard and nothing is backing the money. It goes through the roof, all right? And this chart is only up to 2000. So understanding this is really key, all right? Now, a lot of this also has to do with demographics. Like my mom is here, she's a baby boomer. A lot of them were born post-World War II, so they all entered the workforce at a certain age. All right, so when they all entered the workforce at a certain age, that kind of drove the economy to have inflationary spikes. So the 70s was an inflationary period, all right? So after the 70s, we had a battle. How do we fight inflation? Why are prices rising? You guys may have seen images in the 70s where people used to line up for gas, right? So we decided we're going to make deals with the Middle East. We're going to go to Saudi Arabia and tell them, we'll protect you if you make all your oil sold in US dollars. So if Japan wants to buy oil from Saudi Arabia, it has to be done in US dollars. So this is the petrol system that we've kind of been living in. It's why we've been in these Middle Eastern battles for like the last 40, 50 years, because everything's about protecting Saudi Arabia's interest, so oil and gas can be priced in US dollars. So because we're the last head of the snake, we are the reserve currency, we hold this huge power over everybody else, all right? And our power is not in the military as much as it's in the currency. We can shut people off payment systems. This is what they're doing in Ukraine, in Russia right now. Russia invades Ukraine, the United States says, you can't deal with our US dollar system, that hurts Russia, and this domino effect happens, all right? So this brings us to 2008, all right? We reached a precipice moment in 2008 where we had a full-on banking crisis, all right? The banks are insolvent. The banks do not have your money, all right? I hate to break this to you, they don't, all right? And some of you are probably thinking, well, the FDIC insures my money, all right? That's why we created the FDIC. The FDIC cannot pay out one-tenth of what would it take in a global banking crisis. It can't do it. It's not feasible. So as these banks fail, they consolidate, and you have less and less banks, and then all the power goes to these specific banks, all right? So this is how much money we had to stimulate to get out of 2008, all right? This was a big, big crisis. This was about $800 billion that we had to throw into the market. Now, the thing about throwing this money into the market is it don't help you and I. It don't help the 99%. Inflation only makes the rich richer. It makes the owners richer, all right? And it makes everybody else poor. So if you come to me and you say, I have a job that pays me $50,000 and they're giving me a 5% raise, all right? Guess what? Inflation's at 8%. You've lost money, all right? Because you don't want money, you want the purchasing power, all right? And this is important to understand, is that you're losing value each year. You're losing it. It's a hidden theft in the system. And it's baked in because of banking systems and leverage and debt. And understanding leverage and debt is so key. Because it's kind of like I take out a $50,000 credit card at 2% interest to pay off a loan. Now I can't pay off the credit card. So I take out a $75,000 credit card at 5% interest to pay off the $50,000 credit card. Can't pay that off, so I take out a $100,000 credit card at 8% interest to pay that credit card off. And this compounds, and it gets worse and worse and worse. Global debt right now is $400 trillion, all right? Now, I don't think our brains can really fathom how much a trillion is. If you were to pay $1 a second for 32,000 years, you would pay off $1 trillion. And we have to pay off 400 trillion. The whole global economy is only $85 trillion. So how are we ever going to pay 400 trillion with an economy that only is 85 trillion? It's impossible. So I know that some people sit there and they say, well, you know, the rich, we just tax the rich. Go ahead, tax everyone on this planet 100%, 100%, and make everyone a slave, and you don't touch 35 to 40% of global debt. That's how bad this is. So taxing the rich is not the answer. You know, it's not going to work that way. There isn't enough to pay the debt, all right? You can't service it. So I discussed how we printed about 800 billion during 2008. That was pretty bad. It was really bad. Well, as you can see, this is a New York Times article, we printed close to 5 trillion during COVID. Because the way this works is this is an exponential pattern, and our brains do not understand exponentialities, all right? We have a hard time with this. Each time that we have to do this, it has to get worse and worse and worse, all right? So most of that 400 trillion of global debt has actually just been printed in the last 20 years, all right? So if we reach, you know, 800 trillion, it might happen faster because we have to keep printing to service the debt. So this leaves the federal government, and specifically the Federal Reserve, in a quandary, all right? What do they do, all right? If they were to default on the debt and go bankrupt, all right? All of this system is built on debt and leverage. So you don't know who owns, you know, all these companies, all right? So if BlackRock's fund goes down, everything within BlackRock goes down, and then the consumers feel it at the shelves. You have no food on the shelves, essentially. if they defaulted on the debt. So they can't default on the debt. It's a catch-22. No politician is going to do it. It would be suicide to let it deflate. So they just keep printing, and they make it exponentially worse. And as you saw with the Weimar Germany chart, how bad that this can get. And when it gets that bad, people tend to turn to the federal government. That's kind of exacerbating this problem. And it's why we've kind of seen the rise of, you know, right-wing ideologies, and, you know, everyone's getting desperate. Everyone's getting squeezed. And, you know, the prices of things going up are incongruent with reality, right? So, you know, just looking at this, you see how much money they stimulated. You know, you all got your $1,000 checks, and it really did nothing for any of us in reality. Like, at the end of the day, they give you the $1,000, and then you go out and you buy things on Amazon, and all you've done is made Amazon richer. They didn't make you richer, right? Because they're trying to keep these companies afloat, right? Most of the companies in the S&P 500 index, which is the 500 biggest companies in the world, they're zombie companies. And what I mean by zombie companies is they're companies that are just essentially stimulated by printed money. They're not real producers, like the way like an Amazon is, you know. So this is where it gets really, really crazy, all right? We are reaching a precipice for the first time in history, right? And we have this incongruence where they keep printing money. And then we have this other force of technology that is deflationary, right? So I don't know if anybody remembers Kodak Film. Kodak Film, this company, you bought a digital camera, you bought the film, you know, this whole industry existed around you paying for film, all right? And Kodak don't exist anymore because technology, all your photos are free on your phone. So what you're learning here is that technology creates abundance and it creates free. Or at least it drives the cost down to its utility value. Now there's no need for Kodak anymore. If you were to take your iPhone and you were to transport back to 1980, you know, this thing is probably worth $5 to $10 million because of all the free stuff that it's giving you that it wasn't giving you in 1980 terms. You know, my best friend's here. We went to high school around the same time. I know he remembers that these calculators were probably $80, $90. All right, nobody in their right mind pays $80, $90 for a calculator anymore because, again, it is free on your phone. It is a line of code. All right, so Kodak, your calculator, none of this is in GDP. All right, it doesn't stay in the economy. It goes down to its utility value. It's free, and it doesn't get measured. Now, Blockbuster is one of my favorite examples. All right, why do we not use Blockbuster anymore? So the way existing monopolies work is that they stay boxed in to protect their own business model. And in Blockbuster's case, nobody was better at, you know, the video rental business. All right, they had it cornered. They even had a chance to buy Netflix, and they didn't. And maybe you would do the same because all they were trying to do was protect their business. What they didn't understand is that right around the corner, technology was going to move at a speed to where streaming services were going to make them obsolete. There's no need for cassettes. You know, now we're at a point where there's no need for DVDs. They're almost kind of laughable at this point because everything is streaming. All right? So all these existing monopolies that you think control everything, they get disrupted by something from the outside. They live in a Pac-Man box. Pac-Man can only go left and right, all right? But Pac-Man can't step outside the box. Netflix is the outside the box of Blockbuster, all right? In the case of, you know, Sears, the outside the box thing was Amazon. If Sears would have fell apart in 1999, it would have been a huge story. Oh my God, like Sears is crumbled. Sears fell apart 2 years ago and none of us cared. Because we've already transitioned over to the next thing, the next deflationary thing. So it's really important to understand why technology moves this fast. There's something called Moore's Law. The guy who came up with it, Gordon Moore, he just died recently too. So Moore's Law is the idea that computing power doubles in speed every 2 years. And I want to take a moment to process what this actually means for our world. So the gentleman who inspired me to do this, he gives this interesting exercise where he says if you could fold a piece of paper in half 50 times, how high would it reach? All right? Now, obviously, laws of physics, you can't do this, but this is a mental exercise, right? It's trying to make us understand exponentialities, all right? Because our brains only think linearly, all right? So if you were to fold a piece of paper 50 times, how high would it reach? Anybody have a guess on that?
The moon.
It would reach the moon, that's right. That's right. That's my lovely sister-in-law, all right, who I've had this conversation with before. Think about how hard that is for your brain to process. Because those first couple of folds, those first 10 or 15 folds are nothing. But it's doubling each time. Now our computing power is moving at this rate, all right? So one of the best examples of this is the base layer protocol of the internet is TCP/IP. It was invented by DARPA in like the late 60s, early 70s, all right? And everything we do, and everything we have done with the internet since then is all built on this base layer protocol. So we have this base layer protocol. But it wasn't until 1989 when HTTP, the Hypertransmission Protocol, was put in front of all the WWs, and we have the World Wide Web, all right? That was a layer 4 that was built on top of TCP/IP. Now today, you've seen, throughout time, you've seen streaming become a thing. Recently, over the last couple of years, Zoom has become like a huge thing. And this is all stuff that's built on top of other stuff that's built on top of TCP/IP. Because this is the computer power doubling each time. And it's giving us such value and abundance at rates that are so exponential. And now we're reaching the point where AI is becoming a thing. And think about it, if we're on fold 33 of that piece of paper, what is fold 34 going to look like? The advancements you'll see in the next 2 to 3 years will blow away everything you've seen in the last 100. So understanding this is super key because we're learning here that on one hand, like Kodak and Blockbuster, that technology is deflationary. It's supposed to bring the cost of everything down. But we keep printing money, which is making the cost of everything go up, all right? So, this chart here is kind of showing how the Pentium processors, how much faster they move relative from like 1970 to 2005. Like, as you can see, Moore's Law is definitely real, it's definitely in play, all right? And the AI that is coming, that is already here, is learning at such exponential rates that, I mean, it's going to disrupt every job, all right? Maybe not the analog jobs at first, the construction workers and things like that, but every desk job, every IT job, everything is going to be disrupted simply because these machines are going to just be better than humans. Recently I had someone in the car and we were sitting in traffic and they said to me, there's so many people on the road, this is only going to get worse in 10 years. Just to show you how linear humans think, all right? And I understand that. I understand how people would think that. In reality, it's completely the opposite. The technology will become so good that the cars will become self-driving. We all know that this is inevitable. Once the cars become self-driving, how do you think this is going to play out? Do you think you're going to own a self-driving car, or the companies will own the self-driving cars? You'll pay $100 a month, like a Hulu subscription. You'll never have to pay car insurance again. You'll never have to pay 25 grand. You'll never have to pay 8% interest on that 25 grand. You can go wherever you want, whenever you want. That's how deflationary technology works. When you do that, the whole grid changes. There's no need for parking garages. There's less people on the road because we can now control the grid in a certain way. So this changes everything. And then people will say, I explained this to this gentleman, he's like, well, what happens when a self-driving car kills someone? This is always like the retort you get from people. And I said, well, let's just say 1 million people die on the road every day by human error. As long as 999,000 die in the self-driving car, you've justified having the self-driving car. You've saved, 1,000 lives. It doesn't, as long as you're saving one life, you've justified having that car. And this is how this works. This is how the future is going to play out. So it's really important to understand that we are reaching this precipice where technology is deflationary and our debt is becoming unserviceable, all right? And the current system completely thrives off debt and derivatives, all right? Derivatives are basically it's a kind of a loan on a loan on a loan, all right? So like you have an underlying asset like this bottle of water, but then you have a loan on it, and then a loan on that loan, and then a loan on that loan. But if the underlying asset falls apart, everything else falls apart. And this is the way our system works. It's a cascade. And to ask when it's going to happen, that's like asking which snowflake is going to cause the avalanche, which grain of sand is going to take down the sandcastle. You don't know. You don't know. But it is mathematically inevitable that our monetary system will crumble, that your money is going to either hyperinflate or default, and most likely it'll hyperinflate because they just won't default, all right? So we are in a massive crisis, massive crisis. So currently right now it's May 27th, and we printed $5 trillion during COVID. So we put all that money into the market, and now that money is chasing less and less goods. So basically, I want to do an experiment here. These are the goods you buy, all right? We can call this water bottle oil. We can call this one, gas. We can call this one, energy, all right? So here you are. You come in and you're paying $1 for all of those, okay? So this represents our money. Now, if we print money, what does that do? It doesn't change the amount of oil, gas that's in the system. What it's now doing is it's making this cost $2. Do you see how this is an effect that's really brutal? Because as we keep adding more and more money to the system, all of a sudden these items are going up more and more. And I know everybody has seen what grocery bills look like right now. Why is it that houses are going through the roof, right? It's an incongruence in reality. That's not how this is supposed to work. The way that this is supposed to work is the technology is just simply supposed to deflate, and all of that value is supposed to be passed to us, all right? So the Federal Reserve is in this conundrum. What do? All right? Do they default, or do they keep stimulating with printing money? And even if I was in that boat, I would keep stimulating with printing money. As bad as that scenario is, the default scenario might be worse. So in 2009, a man under the pseudonym Satoshi Nakamoto solved this problem. So to understand what this means is, this is like seeing the wheel for the first time. Little did we know what the wheel would be on society. We had no concept, like years later, like the wheel in its simplicity would just be this amazing invention, right? And I don't think this man knew quite what he invented. I don't even know if I want to call it an invention. Part of me feels like it's a mathematical discovery in cyberspace, and one that cannot be duplicated. And it's very important to understand that you're going to hear this word, and you're going to have this knee-jerk reaction to it, all right? Like when you hear the word Bitcoin, you're like, oh, like, it's a scam. That's your brain is going to do that, all right? And I get it, mine did it too. Like, I fought it. And it's one of those rabbit holes that anybody in the space who's studied this for 100 hours realizes, oh my God, we invented digital scarcity, or we discovered digital scarcity. And the idea of this, it's so transformative for the world, all right? So we are in a transition phase, all right? Bitcoin operates on network effect, all right? So we talk about Moore's law, which is computing power doubles, but there's another law called Metcalfe's law. And Metcalfe's law is all around you every day, and you don't even realize it. So great example of Metcalfe's law is your iPhone, right? I have an iPhone, you have an iPhone, we can talk to each other. Third person has an iPhone, you've doubled the network, they can talk to two people. Every node that you add to the network is doubling it, all right? So this is how Facebook, Twitter, Amazon, the iPhones, they all became big things, and they all became these giant things that were beyond the idea of like traditional investors. Like even Warren Buffett didn't buy Amazon until like 2017 because he didn't understand the value wasn't in, you know, the workers or anything like that. The value is in the network effect, all right? So the internet operated with a network effect as well, all right? It's a slow transition, and then one day, today, we have 4 to 5 billion people, 50 to 60% of the planet are on the internet, all right? Now, that didn't happen overnight. If you would have told the guy in 1985, the lone 6 guys that were probably using the internet in their basement, what the internet would be, they'd almost kind of laugh you out of the building, all right? This is the same way. In fact, the adoption rates on this are faster than the internet. The internet was moving at 67% growth adoption per year in around 1995-96. This is moving at 120%, right? This is double the speed of the internet. Because what this is it exists outside of the system, all right? And there's nothing the system can do to stop this, all right? It's a black hole, right? And recently I've seen like politicians talk about like, well, we can do this, we can do that. You can't do anything. It's like 2 people with bazookas, you know, someone saying, I'm fighting for, I'm firing a bazooka. The other person saying, I'm fighting against Bitcoin, I'm firing a bazooka. It doesn't matter, Bitcoin is a black hole, it eats up everything. It doesn't matter, it doesn't need bazookas, it doesn't need anybody. Because what it represents is an exit of the system. As people get more and more squeezed by inflation, now we don't see it here as much in the United States, but when you live in Lebanon, or you live in Venezuela, or you live in Africa, where the adoption rate is at its highest right now, and your currency has been inflated basically out of existence, they're trying to force you to take digital currency, central bank digital currencies in Nigeria. And basically people are telling them no there because they're like, forget this, we're using Bitcoin. This is an escape. This is like letting air out of one balloon and going into another. And it's an inevitability that nobody can stop, all right? And it's important to understand that. It's important to understand that we are in a transition phase, and it's going to take time. It may take 10 years, 20 years. But one day you're going to look up and the whole world is going to be on this standard because you cannot print this money, all right? You can't mess with this money. It's impossible to mess with this money. It's protected by cryptographic code, all right? There can only be 21 million that will ever exist of this money, all right? It's not something that can be duplicated. It requires work to gain it. It has a system called proof of work, which is the real special part of it, not the blockchain. The blockchain is simply just a database. So when you hear people talk about how blockchain is going to change the world, they're wrong. Blockchain is just simply a database, all right? In reality, it's the proof of work mechanism that makes Bitcoin what it is. So you have to mine Bitcoin, all right? They call it mining. So essentially, you're using energy and power to solve complex algorithms that give you blocks of Bitcoin, all right? Within the code of Bitcoin, it can only release a certain amount every day, all right? So right now, I think it releases 900 Bitcoin a day. So the more people that are fighting as miners for those 900, the harder the hash rate's going to be, the harder it's going to be to achieve it, the more, it's not something you can monopolize, right? So every 4 years it has a halving cycle where that number gets cut in half, and that 900 becomes 450 or release a day. So now the cost of mining it is going to go higher. So it has a built-in free market mechanism that nobody can mess with. So now, if it costs, $20,000 right now to mine a Bitcoin, and then they sell it in the open market for 30, when the halving cycle happens, it's going to cost 40,000 to mine it. What do you think it's going to be in the open market? The point is that the price of this asset is repricing the whole world, all right? So when you measure this asset in dollars, we've already established that the dollar is the manipulated currency. The dollar is the joke. The dollar is the thing that they keep printing that's not worth anything. It's literally going to be as useless as this monopoly money. This is repricing the whole world. So if you think about it like a black hole that's eating everything in its path, and yeah, it has swings where the prices go down because some Joe Schmo who owns 100,000 Bitcoin sells it. But when he sells it, what happens is he sells it. He's one guy who has all that Bitcoin. He sells it. Now, everybody comes in and eats it up. So if 100,000 people are buying the one Bitcoin that he sold, you've added all these people onto the network, and now you're making the network stronger and stronger and stronger. So this is how this is going to play out over the span of 10 years. So if you're in a situation where you want to save money, this is the only way to do it in the future, unfortunately. Like owning assets will be great, owning your house, yeah, the price, because they're going to have to keep printing. But at some point, reality is going to set in here. Now, where it gets really crazy is what would the world look like on this standard compared to what it looks like today. So if we've established that technology is deflationary, and we keep printing money and the prices go higher, but we can't print this, wouldn't, in theory, the deflation of the technology drive all the prices of everything down forever to nothing, to their utility cost? This would essentially benefit the whole world, all right? Because if you have an abundance in money, you've created a scarcity in goods. But if you have a scarcity in money, you've created the abundance in the goods. Because if you think about what I was talking about with the monopoly dollars here, right? When we added, that caused inflation. But now, if we have a scarcity in money, now these things are 66 cents, right? The prices go down. And the prices are supposed to go down. That's how nature is supposed to work. Because we're creating all of this stuff to make our lives easier. In fact, I think it was John Maynard Keynes who kind of made our current banking system. Not a fan, but he did say that the production value of technology, around the 2000s, we should only be working 5 to 10 hours a week. I mean, why hasn't that happened? There is enough abundance in the world that can make this happen. It is not a farcical reality. Most jobs are BS jobs. There's a really great book by David Graeber called Bullshit Jobs. And he literally talks about how 50 to 60% of jobs are just jobs that shouldn't exist for the most hilarious reasons. And most of them are in finance. So if we're changing the whole financial system, most of these financial jobs don't need to exist. So the people that are affected by the money printers the most, the people in Africa, that their currencies are being devalued at 5,000%, they're going to jump first. This is why El Salvador jumped first, why the Central African Republic has jumped first, because they do not want to be under the control of debt. As this debt gets worse, we're kind of going to look to our captors like we've always done to help us, help us out, you got to help us, give us UBI, universal basic income. Well, how would that work? How would that work in a printed debt system? They would just have to print more money to give people UBI. So they're not really helping you. You know, they're giving you $200 on you pass go, but then the prices of everything are raising at a $400 clip. So this is important to understand, that the world is going in a direction that we are in a massive transformation. Massive. And it is going to look really painful during this transformation. And we have to decide, like, what we're going to do here. Now, for me, I haven't fully transported myself into the Bitcoin world, as far as, like, I can't use Bitcoin right now to go to Walmart, because those systems are being built. They're not there yet. But I'm saving in Bitcoin, and I'm understanding that these systems are being built. In fact, I can show you something really wild. So, we were talking about Blockbuster and Netflix's disruption. There's something out there called Nostr right now that will disrupt all social media. So, Nostr is decentralized Twitter, okay? Nobody can censor it, nobody controls it. It's just simply run by relays, all right? But where Nostr gets interesting is you can actually, instead of liking someone's post, you could send them Bitcoin through the Lightning Network instantly. So very recently, someone zapped me about 2,500 Satoshis, which are fractions of a Bitcoin. So I've probably, with 60 something followers, I've made like $11 off just post. Like, we're now monetizing social media, all right? In different ways, not quite like, oh, Kim Kardashian is being paid by advertising. Now you can monetize average people, right? So what do you think Nostr is gonna do? Like, do you think everyone's gonna stay on Twitter eventually? Like, this transition is gonna happen. Twitter will become the Blockbuster. You mean I have a choice to stay on the place where they can censor what I say, where they can control what I do, or I can go to a place where I can do what I want and they can monetize me for my post. I mean, that's an easy choice. In just the same way you made that choice to go to Netflix because it provided value. And this is important to understand, is that these choices are not choices at all. They're just humans adapting, and you will all adapt. Everyone in this room will be on this system. Whether it's now, whether it's 2035, I don't know. But at some point, you're going to realize that the value of staying in the current system is going to be the issue. So just like the people affected in Africa, at some point, we're going to be in the same boat. We just have first world privileges because we're the head of the snake, and we're the last to be affected. But if you simply want to just Google some of the things that are going on around you, like right now we are heading into a recession because they printed so much money, the inflation went up, and now they're trying to combat the inflation by taking liquidity out of the market. They are going to crash the markets. A lot of people are going to lose their jobs. They're going to cause a recession probably the second half of this year, and their only solution is to print more money again. And the next one will be face melting. It'll be so ridiculous. And then you'll turn around when the inflation hits in another year after that, and you'll be like, why the heck is a loaf of bread $9? You'll remember these conversations, because this is a reality that's happening. It's not my opinion. Even the people who wrote these books, it's not as much their opinion. This is just math, and you can't argue math. Like, 2 + 2 is 4. Like, it just is what it is. And there's an acceptance that has to happen with this. So, I'm gonna stop here, and I want you guys to just think about, when you leave this room, do you want to stay in Blockbuster, or do you want to move to Netflix? Do you want to stay with Kodak, or do you want to stay on the sinking Titanic while the government is playing the violins, when all you gotta do is get on the life raft? This is a life raft, all right? Otherwise, you're gonna drown. And just like the Titanic took 4 or 5 hours to drown, just like that, our system is so immense, it's going to take years for our system to drown itself. So we all have a decision. to think about what you want to do in the future, how you want to approach this, I am more than willing to help anybody. Like, I think this is a rabbit hole that even goes beyond what I've talked about today. I've learned some amazing things. Like, even learned that Bitcoin can be time locked into the future, which kind of blew me away. So I just want to close, and I want everyone to think about, that I've planted a seed in your head. What you do with it is on you. All right? But this transition is going to happen with or without us. Thank you.